For as long as I can remember, I carried this itch in the back of my mind, a longing to get away from the grind of the city. The noise never stopped there. Horns blared, people rushed shoulder to shoulder, and the pressure to keep up wore on me every single day. My wife, Emma, felt it just as much as I did. Over late-night dinners or on quiet Sunday mornings, we would talk about how one day we would trade it all in for something simple. We imagined a place where the air smelled clean, where we could grow our own food, and where the only sound at night would be the wind in the trees instead of sirens and shouting. So when we stumbled on a cheap plot of land in the middle of the Oregon wilderness, it almost felt like life was giving us a sign. The realtor warned us right off the bat. "It is way out there," he told us, leaning back in his chair. "You are talking 3 hours from the closest town, and the road that gets you there barely counts as a road at all. Dirt, rocks, ruts, you name it. Most folks would not stick it out." But Emma and I just smiled. That was exactly what we wanted. We sold nearly everything we owned, bought ourselves a used recreational vehicle, and headed out into the woods with our scruffy dog, Rusty. Rusty was a mutt with wiry hair, always chasing anything that moved, and he seemed just as eager for the adventure as we were. Driving out there felt like we were leaving the world behind. Each mile we put between us and the city lightened something in my chest. The road twisted and groaned under the tires, rocks popping beneath us. But when we finally rolled into the clearing, it felt like our own little kingdom. Acres of tall pine trees rose around us, the sky barely breaking through their tops. A creek ran not far from where we parked, its water bubbling in a steady rhythm, almost like a welcome. The spot for the recreational vehicle was perfect, and we could already see where a cabin might someday stand. Still, from the very first night, I could not shake the feeling that something about the place was off. It was not anything I could point to, just this strange heaviness, as if the woods themselves were watching. Emma noticed it too. She did not say anything right away, but the way she glanced at the trees made me realize I was not the only one feeling it. The road leading to our land was rougher than I had pictured. It took at least 20 minutes just to crawl that short stretch, and every rock or rut shook the vehicle so hard I worried we would lose a tire. We had only one neighbor anywhere nearby, a man named Tom, who lived about a mile away in a sagging trailer surrounded by piles of junk. When we first met him, he handed us a jar of blackberry jam he had made himself. He smiled, but there was something sharp in his eyes. "Not many stick around out here," he told us. "Too quiet for most folks. Gets in your head." The way he said it, with that thin smile, made the back of my neck prickle. Emma squeezed my hand right then, and her palm was cold. I laughed it off in the moment, thanked him for the jam, and tried to keep things friendly. But as we walked back to our vehicle, I felt his stare heavy on my back, like he was measuring us. Those first days we stayed busy. We set up a fire pit using stones we hauled from the creek. We started clearing brush where we hoped to build the cabin. Rusty ran wild through the trees, barking at squirrels and tumbling in the dirt, happy as could be. During the daytime, the forest was alive. Birds filled the air with song, and the wind danced through the pines. But once night fell, it was another story. The silence in those woods was not like city silence. It pressed down on you, thick and heavy, as though the whole forest was holding its breath. Lying awake in the recreational vehicle at night, I would wait for something to break that silence. More than once, I heard branches snap or leaves crunch, like something heavy moving just out of sight. I told myself it was a deer, or maybe a bear, but no matter how long I stared out the small window, I never saw anything. Emma felt it too. One night while she stirred soup over the propane stove, she said softly, "It is too quiet. It feels like the woods are waiting for something." I wrapped my arms around her, forcing a laugh. "It is just new to us. We will get used to it." But inside, I was not so sure. About a week into living there, things took a turn. One morning we stepped outside to find Rusty's water bowl tipped over. At first I thought it was nothing. Maybe Rusty had knocked it himself. But then I saw the prints, muddy boot prints, big ones, circled the recreational vehicle before trailing back into the trees. They were far too wide to be mine, and Emma's shoes were tiny compared to them. My stomach tightened. "Maybe Tom stopped by," I said, though even I did not believe it. Emma shook her head. "He would have told us. And why would he spill Rusty's water?" She was right. It did not make sense. From then on, we kept Rusty inside at night and locked the vehicle's door, something we had not felt the need to do before. That night, I barely slept. Around 3 in the morning, Rusty started growling, low and steady, his eyes locked on the window. I grabbed the flashlight and swept it across the clearing, but all I saw were shadows shifting. "It is all right, boy," I whispered, though my heart was thumping so hard it hurt. The next day, I decided to drive over to Tom's place. His yard looked even worse up close, with rusted-out car parts and a half-built shed under a sagging tarp. He was sitting outside, whittling a stick, the blade flashing as he carved. When I mentioned the footprints, he did not even look up. "Could be anyone," he said flatly. "These woods are old. Hunters, drifters, people who do not like being found. Some say there are old camps out here, folks who do not take kindly to strangers." His words were calm, but there was an edge to them, like he was testing me. When I asked if he had been by our clearing, he just chuckled, shaking his head. "Not me, but you might want to get yourself a gun. Never know who is out there." I nodded, trying to play it cool, but as I drove back, my skin crawled. When I pulled the recreational vehicle back into our clearing, after talking to Tom, Emma was waiting for me by the little kitchen window. I could tell from her face she had been pacing the whole time I was gone. The moment I stepped inside, she asked what he had said. I tried to downplay it, told her he had brushed it off, said it might be hunters or drifters, but the look in her eyes told me she already knew there was more. "I do not like this," she said, her voice sharp and thin. She walked back and forth across the tiny kitchen, her arms folded tight. "I keep feeling like someone is watching us. Yesterday, when I was down at the creek, I heard something in the brush. I thought it was Rusty, but he was right beside me." Her voice broke a little at the end. I pulled her close and tried to sound confident, even though my stomach was twisted in knots. "We will be all right," I told her. "We just need to stay together, keep the doors locked, and I will get something to boost the phone signal so we can call out if we have to." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. That night we took extra precautions. We triple-checked the locks, tied Rusty's leash to the bed frame so he could not bolt outside, and I kept a kitchen knife and a heavy flashlight within reach. Truth be told, neither of those things would do much good if it was something serious, but they gave me a small bit of comfort. Sometime around midnight it began. At first it was faint, just a soft tapping sound, like knuckles on a tree trunk. Tap, tap, tap. Rusty's ears perked, and then the growl started low in his throat. Emma gripped my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. My mouth was dry, but I nodded. The sound grew louder, moving from somewhere out in the trees closer to the edge of the clearing. Then came another noise, a slow, deliberate scrape, like something sharp being dragged across metal. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The hairs stood up on the back of my neck. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would burst. "Stay here," I told Emma, picking up the knife and flashlight. Her eyes went wide with panic. "Do not you dare go out there," she hissed, clutching Rusty, who was barking now, teeth bared. I cracked the window open just enough to shine the flashlight beam outside. The light cut across the clearing but caught nothing except swaying tree branches. "Who is out there?" I shouted, my voice shaking more than I wanted. At first there was nothing but silence. Then, from somewhere just beyond the trees, came a voice, low, gravelly, more growl than speech. You do not belong here. The words froze me to the core. They were so close, so clear, like whoever it was could have been standing a few yards away. My whole body turned to ice. I slammed the window shut, locked it tight, and stumbled back to Emma. She had tears streaming down her face. "What was that?" she whispered. I shook my head. "I do not know, but we are not opening that door." The tapping and scraping went on for what felt like hours. Sometimes it would fade away into the distance, and we would think maybe it was over, but then it would start again, closer, circling us, like whoever it was playing some sick game. Rusty never stopped growling, his body stiff, and Emma clung to me, whispering over and over, "Please, make it stop." I banged on the wall of the recreational vehicle, shouting at the top of my lungs, "Get out of here! Leave us alone!" But it did no good. The sounds just kept coming, relentless, until finally, just before dawn, they stopped. We sat frozen in that little space, waiting for the light. When the sun finally broke over the trees, we stepped outside, shaky and exhausted. That was when we saw it. The sides of the vehicle were covered in long, jagged scratches, deep enough that I knew they could not have come from branches or animals. Around the clearing were more boot prints, some smudged, some clear, as if someone had been pacing circles around us all night. And right there by the fire pit lay Rusty's favorite toy, a tennis ball he carried everywhere. Only now it had been sliced clean in half. Emma broke down crying. "We are leaving," she said through tears. "We are leaving right now." We packed in a frenzy, tossing clothes and gear into bags, not even caring about the things we left behind. As I carried the last bag out, my eyes caught on something carved into a pine tree at the edge of the clearing. It was a crude symbol, a circle with 3 jagged lines slashed through it. I knew for certain it had not been there the day before. My stomach churned, but I kept my mouth shut. Emma was already on edge, and I was not about to make it worse. We drove down that awful dirt road as fast as we dared, and when we passed Tom's trailer, he was standing outside. He did not wave, did not call out. He just stood there in the morning light, his face blank, watching us as we rolled by, a shadow among the trees. We made it to a small motel in town and collapsed onto the bed, too drained to even sleep. Over the next few days, I buried myself in online forums and news articles, looking for answers. What I found chilled me. Stories of hikers who had gone missing, reports of strange carvings on trees, just like the one I had seen. Whispers of groups of drifters, people who lived deep in the woods, moving between abandoned cabins, hostile to outsiders. One post told of a couple who had left their homestead after finding scratches on their trailer and hearing voices at night. Another described a pattern of symbols appearing on trees, warnings to strangers not to linger. The police reports were thin, barely investigated, too far out, too little evidence. In the end, Emma and I knew we had made the right choice. We never went back. As far as I know, the recreational vehicle still sits in that clearing, along with the dreams we once had of off-grid living. Now we rent a small apartment back in the city. The hum of traffic, the sounds of neighbors through thin walls, those noises that used to annoy me now feel safer than that suffocating silence ever did. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and hear the tapping in my mind. Tap, tap, tap. Emma never speaks of it, but she sleeps with a light on now, and Rusty sticks close to her side, like he knows something we do not. I still do not know who or what was out there that night, but I know for certain we were not alone in those woods, and I'm not sure we ever would have been. Back when I was a kid, I used to sit out on the back porch of our little house and just stare into the woods. Something about the trees always called to me. They looked quiet and strong, untouched by all the noise and hustle of the world outside. Even as a boy, I felt like I belonged more in those woods than I did in a classroom or crowded street. I never said much about it to anyone, but in the back of my mind, I knew I was different. I wanted a life that was quiet, steady, and simple. A life that did not depend on money or bosses or people telling me what to do. By the time I got older, that feeling only grew stronger. I worked a few jobs here and there, stocking shelves, pumping gas, even some construction, but none of it felt right. Every morning, I would drag myself out of bed, push through the day and come home wondering why I was wasting my time, living by rules that never made sense to me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I did not want to just keep going through the motions. I wanted to disappear, to carve out a space where I could live on my own terms, away from everybody else. The plan built itself slowly in my head. I started reading about survival, about how people used to live off the land before all the machines and screens. I collected old books on foraging, camping, and fire building. I learned which plants were safe to eat and which ones would kill you in a heartbeat. And every time I stepped into the woods, I felt more certain. One day, I told myself, I am going to walk in here and not come back. That day came in 1986. I remember it clear as glass. I woke up, looked around my little rented room and thought, this is not my life, not anymore. I packed a small bag with a few clothes, some food, and a flashlight. I grabbed a tent and a sleeping bag, and without telling a soul, I drove my old car as far as it would go toward North Pond in Maine. When the road ended, I left the car sitting there, slung the bag over my shoulder, and walked into the woods. I never went back. The first days were the hardest. I had food, but I knew it would run out fast, so I rationed every bite. I built my first fire with shaking hands, striking the lighter over and over until the flame finally caught. That little blaze felt like a victory, a promise that maybe I really could survive out here. Nights were cold, colder than I had expected, and every sound in the dark made my heart race. A snapping twig, a rustle in the leaves, it all sounded like danger, but I held on. Each day I learned a little more, got a little stronger, and felt a little freer. When my supplies got low, I knew I would have to figure out a way to get more food. Hunting and fishing sounded good in theory, but I was no expert. I tried, of course, setting snares and casting lines into the water, but I could not rely on it. So I started doing something I am not proud of, but it kept me alive. I stole. At first it was small. A can of beans from a cabin, a bag of chips from a cooler left outside. But over time, it became a way of life. I learned the habits of the summer people who came up to their lakeside cabins. I knew which families left their windows cracked, which ones stored food in their sheds, and which ones kept their doors unlocked. I never took more than I needed, and I never trashed a place. I respected the cabins, but I did what I had to do. Word spread among the locals about the Hermit of North Pond. They told stories about someone sneaking around at night, stealing food and supplies, leaving almost no trace. Some folks thought it was a prank, others swore it was a ghost, but I was real enough. I learned to move silently, to melt into the trees, to never leave tracks if I could help it. Years rolled by, and the seasons taught me everything I needed to know. Winters were brutal. Snow would pile up so deep it swallowed cabins whole. I made myself a hidden camp, built a shelter that blended into the rocks and trees. I insulated it with tarps and pine needles, kept it low to the ground, and stacked supplies like a squirrel. Still, the cold was vicious. There were nights when I shivered so hard I thought my teeth would crack, nights when I wondered if I would even see the morning. But I always did. Over the decades, I must have broken into hundreds of cabins. Sometimes I would take only a few candy bars, other times a propane tank or a sleeping bag. People would return to their places and find signs, a missing jar of peanut butter, a flashlight gone, a book left out of place, and they would whisper about me. Some cursed me, some pitied me, and a few even admired me. But nobody caught me, not for a long, long time. Living alone like that does something to a man. The silence gets deep. Days blur together. Sometimes I would not hear another human voice for months. I would talk to the trees, to the animals, to the wind, just to remind myself that I still had a voice. And yet, I did not feel lonely, not really. The woods were alive. They gave me everything I needed: shelter, food, and peace. I knew I was different from the people in town, different from the world I had left behind. But out there, in the quiet shadows of North Pond, I felt like I finally belonged. Life in the woods settled into a rhythm after those first few hard years. At first, every day had been a struggle, every fire a battle, every meal a small victory. But after a while, I learned the ways of the forest so well that I almost stopped thinking about it. The days just rolled by, quiet and steady. I woke with the sun, listened to the wind in the trees, checked my supplies, and did whatever was needed to keep myself alive. I was not living in comfort, but I was living in freedom. The seasons taught me discipline. Spring meant new growth, a chance to collect berries and greens. Summer was the easiest, with long days and plenty of food around. Fall meant stocking up, preparing for the long stretch of winter. And winter, that was always the test. The cold was sharp enough to cut through bone, and the snow piled high enough to bury everything I had built. I learned to melt snow for water, to store food in hidden caches, to move only when I had to. Nights would last forever, and I would lie awake in my little shelter, listening to the ice groan on the pond, and wonder if I had made a mistake. But somehow, I always made it through. My visits to the cabins grew sharper, more careful. By then, I had it down to an art. I could slip into a place without leaving a single footprint, take only what I needed, and slip back out before anyone noticed. I never smashed windows or broke locks. That would have drawn attention. Instead, I moved like a shadow, lifting latches, easing doors open, and taking just enough to get by. A jar of peanut butter, a handful of batteries, a pair of warm socks left in a drawer. To the people who owned those cabins, it must have seemed like the work of a ghost. Over the years, stories about me spread like wildfire. Folks around North Pond would sit by their campfires and swap tales about the Hermit. Some said I had been living out there since the 70s. Others swore I was a Vietnam veteran who never came home. A few believed I was nothing more than a myth, a campfire story meant to spook the kids. I never tried to correct them. I liked being a ghost. The more unbelievable the stories became, the safer I was. The truth was simpler. I was just a man who walked into the woods one day and never walked back out. But people like to dress up the truth with mystery, and in this case, I let them. Even so, there was always risk. Every time I crept into a cabin, I knew I might find myself face to face with the owner. There were nights when I froze in the shadows, my heart pounding as I heard footsteps outside. There were mornings when I found new locks on doors or motion lights nailed up on porches. The locals were not blind. They knew someone was out there. But I was careful, and for nearly 3 decades, nobody laid eyes on me. Living that long without speaking to another person does something to your mind. I went more than 20 years without a real conversation. Sometimes, just to hear a human voice, I would whisper words out loud, practice phrases under my breath, like I was rehearsing for a play I would never perform. I knew the world was still out there, rushing along with its machines and its noise, but it felt far away, like a dream I had once had. But dreams cannot last forever. My downfall came one chilly night in April of 2013. I had been watching a particular camp for weeks. The family who owned it always left supplies in their shed, snacks, propane, cooking gear. I thought it was safe enough. I waited until dark, crept up as I had done 1,000 times before, and slipped inside. My flashlight cut a thin beam across the shelves. I spotted a pack of food and reached for it. That was when the door burst open. The beam of a police flashlight hit me square in the eyes. I froze like a deer caught in headlights. Before I could even think about running, they were on me. 2 officers, armed and ready, blocking every way out. My body went slack. After all those years of slipping through the cracks, of living unseen, I was caught. They asked me questions, but my voice barely worked. I had not spoken to anyone in decades, and the words came out broken, rusty, like old machinery grinding back to life. They hauled me out of that shed and into the world I had walked away from nearly 30 years earlier. The news spread fast. North Pond Hermit caught after 27 years. My face was in the papers, my story on the television. People were shocked to learn I was real. Some were angry about the thefts, others fascinated by how I had managed to survive. They called me a thief, a legend, a loner, a criminal, a mystery. To me, I was just a man who wanted peace. I stood in a courtroom, clean-shaven for the first time in decades, wearing clothes I had not chosen. Reporters shouted questions as I was led past, their voices sharp, hungry for pieces of me. I felt like an animal dragged out of the woods and put on display. All I wanted was to fade back into the shadows, but that choice was gone now. Looking back, I still do not know if I regret it. Those years in the woods were hard, yes, but they were mine. I lived the way I wanted to, with no one to answer to. And though the world might never understand why, I can say this much. For 27 years, I was free. I was never the kind of man who planned on breaking into somebody else's place. Truth is, I always thought of myself as decent enough, the kind who minded his own business. But times were rough, money was scarce, and my options were running out fast. I had lost steady work, bills piled up higher than I could manage, and before long I was staring down nights where I was not sure if I could even keep the lights on. Desperation does things to a man that he swears he would never do. That is how I found myself eyeing a lonely cabin out in the woods, like it was some kind of answer. I had known about the place for a while. It sat quiet at the edge of a dirt trail, tucked back behind some pine trees, like it wanted to be forgotten. No smoke ever came from the chimney. No lights flickered in the windows. I figured nobody had been there in years. From the outside, it looked like one of those abandoned spots you drive past without a second thought. To me, though, it started to look like opportunity. One cold evening, I walked out to the cabin with my heart thumping against my ribs. The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles, and every crunch of leaves beneath my boots seemed louder than a gunshot. I told myself I would just look around, see if there was anything useful left behind. Maybe canned food, maybe blankets, anything to help me scrape by another week. That was all. At least, that was what I kept repeating to calm the guilt gnawing at my gut. The door was locked, but the wood around it was old and swollen from rain. With a little pressure and a good shove, the frame gave way. The crack of splintering wood rang through the trees, and I froze, half expecting someone to come charging out with a shotgun. Nothing moved. The forest stayed silent, and the cabin welcomed me in with stale air and shadows. Inside, the place smelled like dust and something else I could not place right away, something sharp, almost metallic. The floor creaked under my boots as I stepped across the room. There was a small table with 2 chairs, both draped in cobwebs. The windows were grimy, barely letting in the moonlight. It looked like time had stopped inside that cabin a long while ago. I set my flashlight on and swept the beam across the walls. That is when I noticed the carvings. All along the wood, strange symbols had been scratched into the surface. Circles, crooked lines, shapes that reminded me of eyes. They covered nearly every board, layered on top of one another, as if someone had spent years filling every inch. Some were shallow and faint, while others were cut deep, like whoever had made them pressed the knife in hard. I stepped closer, tracing my fingers over the grooves. The wood felt rough and cold beneath my skin. I did not recognize any of the symbols, but they gave me a feeling I could not shake, like the walls themselves were watching me. I pulled my hand back quick and wiped my palm on my jeans, trying to brush off the unease that crawled over me. The longer I looked around, the stranger it all seemed. In one corner sat a stack of glass jars, each one cloudy with age. I picked one up, holding it to the light, and saw it was filled with dead insects, moths, beetles, even a spider curled up at the bottom. Another jar had what looked like dried herbs, tied into little bundles with twine. It struck me as odd, but I set them back down, telling myself not to think too hard about it. I should have left right then. Any man with sense would have. But something about that cabin pulled me in deeper. It was not just about finding supplies anymore. It was curiosity, a restless itch that pushed me to see more. In the back of the room stood a narrow door, half hidden by a ragged curtain. My hand shook a little as I pulled it open. A narrow staircase led down into darkness. The smell hit me harder there, stronger, like rust mixed with damp earth. My flashlight beam trembled as I shined it down, and for a moment I thought about turning around and leaving, but I had already come this far, and my stubbornness would not let me walk away without knowing what was down there. Step by step, I descended into the basement. The air grew colder, heavy enough that each breath felt thick in my chest. The walls down there were made of stone, slick with moisture. My light swept across shelves lined with more jars, dozens of them, filled with things I could not even begin to describe. Some looked like bones, small ones, maybe from animals, but I was not sure. Others had cloudy liquids with shapes floating inside, shapes that twisted and curled as if they were alive even now. My stomach turned. The basement was no ordinary storage space. It felt like a place meant for something else entirely, something I did not want to understand. I backed up a step, my flashlight shaking in my hand, and for the first time since I had entered that cabin, I felt the full weight of what I had done. This was no abandoned cabin left to rot in the woods. Somebody had used this place. Somebody had left their mark in every line carved into the walls, in every jar stacked on those shelves. And whoever they were, I had the gut-deep feeling they might not be as gone as I had hoped. Standing there in that basement, with the cold stone pressing in and the smell of rust and rot thick in the air, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Real fear. Not the kind of fear you get from running out of money or worrying about bills, but the primal kind that crawls straight into your bones and tells you to run. Every instinct I had screamed at me to get out of that cabin, to put as much distance as I could between myself and those shelves of jars. But I did not move. I just stood there, staring, caught between horror and fascination. My flashlight drifted from one jar to the next, each one worse than the last. Some held things that looked like hunks of flesh, shriveled and floating in murky liquid. Others had feathers pressed flat, wings bent in unnatural ways. And then I saw a jar that made my throat close tight. It looked like a human hand, small and pale, curled as if it was trying to grip the glass from the inside. I staggered back, nearly tripping over my own boots. My chest heaved as if the air itself was trying to push me out of that place. I thought about bolting for the stairs, but slamming the basement door shut and never looking back. But something inside me refused to leave unanswered questions behind. Maybe it was stupidity, maybe it was pride, or maybe it was that old itch for curiosity, the same one that had dragged me inside this cabin in the first place. Against my better judgment, I kept looking. On the far wall, I spotted a wooden box, nailed shut and wedged into a little alcove. The nails were old, the wood dark with age. My hands trembled as I set my flashlight down and pried at the lid with a rusted piece of metal I found on the floor. With a screech, the nails gave way and the lid popped open. Inside were stacks of papers, brittle and yellowed, covered with writing that made no sense to me. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, almost frantic. Lines of text circled around strange drawings. More of those same symbols I had seen upstairs. Some pages had diagrams of bodies, animals cut apart and labeled in words I did not recognize. Others were filled edge to edge, with nothing but the same word repeated over and over, scratched so hard into the paper that it tore through. I flipped through the pages, my fingers smudging the ink. The more I saw, the more it felt like I was staring into the mind of someone who had slipped far past sanity. Whoever had lived in this cabin had not just been passing time, they had been working at something dark and obsessive. That was when I heard it. At first, I thought it was the house settling, a groan of old wood above my head. But then it came again, clearer. A shuffle of footsteps across the floor upstairs. I froze, every muscle locked tight, my ears strained in the silence. Another step, then another. Slow, deliberate, heavy enough to shake dust loose from the beams overhead. My blood ran cold. I knew I had come out here because I thought the place was abandoned. But now, standing in that basement, I realized I might not be alone after all. I snatched up my flashlight and killed the beam, plunging myself into darkness, my back pressed against the stone wall, heart hammering so loud I was sure it would give me away. The footsteps moved across the floor above, slow as a heartbeat. Then they stopped. For a long minute, nothing happened. The silence was worse than the noise. My thoughts raced. Was it the owner come back after all this time? Was it some hunter who had stumbled across the cabin? Or was it something else entirely, something that belonged to those jars and those pages? I did not wait to find out. With shaking hands, I slipped the papers back into the box, slammed the lid shut and scrambled up the stairs. The steps creaked beneath my weight, each one louder than I wanted, but fear drove me faster than caution. I shoved the basement door open and burst into the main room. The cabin was empty. The front door hung wide open, swinging slightly on its hinges. Cold night air rushed in, carrying with it the sound of the forest. I did not stick around to check for tracks. I bolted straight out the door, across the clearing, and into the trees. Branches whipped at my face as I ran, but I did not stop, not until the cabin was far behind me, and the only sound was my ragged breathing. When I finally stopped, bent over with my hands on my knees, I looked back through the trees. The cabin sat there in the moonlight, quiet and still, like it had been all along. But I knew better. I knew there was something inside that place, something I should never have seen. To this day, I do not know who or what I heard walking above me that night. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe it was the man who carved those symbols and filled those jars, coming back to continue his work. Or maybe it was something worse, something that was never supposed to leave that basement. All I know is that I never went back. I took the long way around the woods from then on, steering clear of that trail, of those pines, of that cabin that still waits in the dark. And if you ever find yourself wandering through those woods and you stumble across a lonely little house tucked behind the trees, I would give you one piece of advice. Keep walking. Some places are better left alone.